Hi, I'm Jo, and I am so happy you're here. Welcome to my weird little corner of the internet, where my best friend since I was in 8th grade, Morgan Walsh, and I source stories from all over the internet and weird entries we get from our inbox to bring you true, ridiculous, funny, embarrassing, awkward, terrible stories that we turn into 20-minute, take your mind off of everything, end of the day, middle of the day tales, always with a happy ending to make you happy and us happy. So that's what we're doing here. And today's story, I'm going to tell you why I really like it, because some of these were like, okay, there's a moral here. The moral here is, generally something that you probably shouldn't publish in a children's book, but whatever. And I think the moral of this story is one of the best things about being an adult, because we talk a lot about what's awful about being an adult, like paying bills and repercussions and weird social anxiety, not being able to sleep, having a weird itch in your upper back that is not a dermatological condition, but has something to do with nerve endings, and you are itching for 24 hours a day. Like, there's obviously all kinds of stuff that sucks about getting older and sucks about being mature and responsible and all of the shit that comes along with that. But here is a good part of being an adult that comes with this story, which is free will. And you'll see when we get there. But at the end of it, I kind of love that this guy never goes back. Guys, sit back, relax, tune in, tune out, unplug. Please share, like, subscribe. We're not picky with anybody, anywhere, anytime. Enjoy. Theo loved dogs. He liked long walks and not quite ripe bananas, and making plans for a reasonable and safe future. The dog part was just some random genetic trait that made him want to stop and pet every pup that he passed on the sidewalk in his little London suburb of a town. The banana thing was most likely just a matter of personal preference, although it could possibly have been genetic, as all the men on his mother's side felt the same way. The safe and reasonable future part was ingrained into him from day one. As a wee tyke, his Aunt Susan had given him a game of playing cards with various professions printed on them. The game was called something not at all obvious, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? Now, logically, the game shouldn't have had any right or wrong answers. It was created and marketed to babies who had no clue what the decision meant. But in Theo's house, it sort of did. He would grab at the card with the man in the fire hat or the woman in a lab coat holding a kitten, and every time his parents would shake their heads and hand him the card of the man in khakis and a polo shirt holding a briefcase. Not many people would proclaim to be destined for middle management, but maybe Theo was. For a moment or two in high school, he'd entertained the idea of becoming a veterinarian. Theo's father had thought that particular occupation was too close to farming, which he himself had to endure as a boy, and wanted nothing of that life for his only son. "You cannot have a cow as a co-worker," he declared when Theo suggested his future career. Now, Theo knew that if he studied science and medicine and worked hard and got his veterinary degree, he would not have a cow as a co-worker. The only way that statement would be true would be if Theo miraculously discovered how to produce milk and agreed to be hooked up to a machine in a dairy farm to increase the production of said milk, and in turn convince the general public that this particular human bodily secretion paired nicely with honey and PG tips. This was not happening. Still, bereft of logic or not, Theo went along with his father's wishes because that's what good sons do. "Accounting," his father declared one Sunday after the family's regular roast chicken dinner. He said it with such confidence and excitement that Theo never ventured to challenge his father and signed up for all the right classes. He did fine in school, even though paying attention to detail was never his strong suit. It was while he was riding his bike through his suburban neighborhood, tossing the newspaper from his satchel from one doorstep to the next, that Theo's mind both wandered and wondered. He'd squint just for a few seconds into each of the windows on the street, trying to imagine the lives that took shape inside those walls. He wondered what the people did for work or where they bought their pants. He wondered about how all the decisions came to be made that made a life. He wondered if there were options. But that was a big thought, a gigantic idea for his 13-year-old brain, and truthfully, a concept he wasn't quite ready for. Big decisions were not exactly on the table for young Theodore. He did as he was told. He was a solid B+ student all throughout school. He could have been an A, but his work consistently lacked imagination and originality. He did the work that was expected of him, avoided conflict, and mostly stayed out of trouble as much as any young boy can. Many newspapers and years after that time, Theo didn't even remember choosing accounting on his school application, but he must have, because 4 years and dozens of classes later, that was the subject that was printed on his degree. Lumbering his 6'3" frame across the stage in his cap and gown, Theo paused for a moment, gazing out into the audience, looking for his parents, who were impossible to find amongst the sea of khaki-clad 50-something-year-olds. Even his mother's soft brown curls blended in with all the other mothers' soft brown curls. So, always thoughtful and hedging his bets, Theo waved in the general direction of all the clapping parents and held up his diploma so somewhere out there his father could snap a photo and turn the page on this chapter of all of their lives. Jamieson and Sons Accounting looked like any and every beige office in Havering. When Theo stepped through the doors on his first day, he had trouble remembering the interview as they all sort of blended together. Nina, the red lipsticked receptionist, greeted him with a practiced smile. "Good morning, you must be Theo. Let me show you round." Theo nodded with a smile that he hoped conveyed the correct amount of enthusiasm and followed Nina to his cubicle. Each time they passed an open door, she would mention the person's name residing in said office. Then each accountant would briefly look up from their screen, nod in Theo's general direction, and go right back to their work. It was as warm as the back of a freezer. Nina opened the last door at the end of the hallway and handed him a folder. "Here's the login information for your accounts. In order to make it here, they expect you to be a self-starter, so sort of take things into your own hands, get it done, you know?" Nina looked at Theo expectantly, as if there should be some applause for this incredible amount of information. Theo forced his face into the largest smile he could imagine. By the time he'd stretched his lips across his face, she'd already spun on her very sensible heel and was returning back to the front of the office. Theo glanced around the hallway to see if any of his new coworkers had witnessed the awkward interaction. No, not a human. Then a quiet but repeated thud sound caught his ear. 3 offices down, a fluffy golden tail wagged against a green carpeted floor. Then a beautiful retriever's head stuck out. The dog saw Theo smile and gave him one right back. Theo sat at his desk, made himself as comfortable as possible in the office chair, and typed thoughtfully. It was mostly a data entry, but he wanted to start out his first week strong and not make a mistake. He allowed himself a glance at the dog each 30 minutes on the dot whenever he took a trip to the loo. He'd walk down the hallway, crinkling his face into a look that he hoped conveyed that he was deep in thought and not deeply bored. It didn't matter. It was the unfriendliest workplace in the UK. No one said hello. No one asked how he was settling in. In fact, after 3 days of this, Theo was pretty sure that the only eye contact he'd made since Monday was with the dog. The next morning was a slog, to be honest, and the morning after that. It was almost as if regular humans entered the Jamieson and Sons doors and became accountant zombies with no need for human interaction for the rest of the day. Theo stared at his screen, watching the numbers swim around on the page until they morphed into meaningless, mateless blobs with no direction. And even though Theo had spent his life fighting the urge to wander and to wonder, to squash his impulses to daydream, to focus on the road ahead and not crane his neck for shortcuts or turnouts or any kind of scenic route, that first week of work of the beginning of his professional life forced him to question his present situation. The relentless drone of overhead fluorescent lights felt like the sound of car brakes screeching on a hot summer day in his ears. The musty smell of the office reminded him of a long-forgotten bologna sandwich, and the click, click, click of his colleagues' keyboards made him feel immediately unqualified for this boring job. And that's when he felt it, right on his ankle. To be fair, it's almost as if Theo knew it was happening before it happened. But when he finally mustered the courage to look down, not out of fear for his life, simply fear of disappointment if he were wrong, he saw it. The big, fluffy, dare he say, happy-looking golden retriever had sauntered over to his desk and placed himself right at Theo's left ankle. Theo felt his heart race. The dog was so kind-looking, so gentle, and when he looked up at the newest accountant at Jameson & Sons, Theo knew without a doubt that this dog needed to go for a walk. The dog's timing was impeccable. Theo, too, also very much needed a walk. "Is this anyone's pup?" Theo called down the hallway, but no one responded. He knocked gently on the door to the right. The office's owner signaled that they were on a call and had no time to be bothered. Theo tapped on the door to the left. "In the middle of something," a female voice called out in a tone implying that Theo should most likely go away and never, ever come back. Okay, thought Theo. Maybe leaving the office midday on your first week wasn't the best move. Maybe it didn't convey the worker bee mentality that he had so strictly cultivated for himself, but Theo felt there was a good chance that he would pull out all of his hair and most of his fingernails if he didn't get out of that building in the next 60 seconds. The dog appeared to agree. As Theo and the dog made their way through the front door, an ancient bell jingling against the glass, Theo wondered if perhaps taking the office dog for a walk was a brilliant way of integrating himself into the uptight office culture. Maybe this bit of a jaunt would make him a hero. Maybe. And that's when it started. The thing that our hero had worked so hard to resist. The wondering, which was immediately followed by the wandering. Neither he nor the dog realized that they'd been gone for an hour. It happened to be the exact time of day that the sun managed to fight its way through the cloudy sky, and the birds came out to chirp and sing, and the air decided to be clean and crisp and cool and refreshing. The two guys walked up to the top of the neighborhood, noting both people and squirrels running errands. Their strides lengthened, their upper bodies relaxed, and one of them let their tongue hang out in absolute joy and relaxation. Theo unbuttoned his coat and allowed the muscles of his face to melt in the springtime sunshine. It was the closest he had felt to bliss in recent memory. The dog looked up at him, and Theo swears he smiled. Their paces matched, their legs in step with one another. Pretty women smiled from behind sunglasses, and more than one commented on what a cute dog Theo had. Theo didn't realize he was talking to the dog until he was more than halfway through telling his life story. His wondering and wandering brain had asked himself how he had wound up in this exact place at this exact time. And having such an agreeable companion, he decided to go back to the moment that the dominoes of his future had been set in motion and just talk it out. Theo wasn't sure what it says about him that the deepest and most profound self-reflection he'd ever had up until that point in his life was with a golden retriever whom he'd only just met, but there it was. These things are rarely planned. Maybe it was the sunshine. Maybe it was the fresh air. Maybe it was the happy dog brushing against his calves. Or maybe it was simply the time and the space to share his dreams and fears out loud. But it was a wildly unexpected come-to-Jesus moment in the life of Theodore Cattingham. He knew that he would need an entirely different career path in order to be happy. But he couldn't just up and quit Jameson & Sons 4.5 days into his tenure there, right? When they turned the corner and the crumbling brick building came into view, Theo gasped as his happy feelings evaporated. There was something about the way the clouds appeared out of nowhere, the way the birds suddenly ceased their singing, about how the barometric pressure seemed to drop without warning, sending an icy vibration through all of Theo's extremities. Now, look, this should have been a sign. Had Theo been taught to pay any attention whatsoever to his wants or needs or instincts, he would have looked up at that awful building, down at that beautiful dog, and just ran. In hindsight, it was a good thing that he didn't. Because when Theo pushed open the crotchety old door with the banging holiday bell into the Jameson & Sons accounting firm's building, the air was thick with tension. Again, because of Theo's emotionally stunted upbringing, he didn't really notice. That's where the entire office staff, huddled together on the ancient green carpeting, was waiting for him. It reminded Theo of a very depressing surprise party. Once, Theo had a surprise party. It was a legitimate surprise because it was the day after his 9th birthday, which his parents had forgotten altogether, and young Theo was too polite, even in the 4th grade, to have said anything. By the time his mother realized what had happened, the day had come and gone, so she atoned by corralling every available person in their neighborhood, young, old, weird, still in diapers, who was available at noon the following day. That's when the hodgepodge of party guests scared the literal piss out of her son when the crowd jumped out and surprised him on a day that was not, again, in fact, his birthday. The truth is, any one of us would have been irreparably traumatized. This welcome back to the Jameson & Sons office reminded him briefly of that moment 15 years prior. But this time, no one had cake, or even a smile. As Theo's eyes widened, he dropped the dog's leash. The dog, having walked a both satisfying and tiring amount, sauntered lazily to a woman in a navy dress and dark sunglasses. "Oliver, I thought I'd lost you." Theo watched as the rest of the office crowd shot him with poisonous looks, and as the woman in the navy dress fumbled to find the dog's ears. Theo felt his face begin to burn, and the horrible sensation traveled down to his stomach, turning it into what felt like a brick knot. His eyes darted from one coworker to another. Each one shook their heads, looking at poor Theo with faces brimming with disgust. He watched as his one friend, his only acquaintance, trod off his leash in front of the lady with the navy dress. "Really?" said the man who shared his right office wall and was too busy to be bothered 2 hours ago. "You had to take Ava's dog? The poor woman is blind?" And with that, the office mates filed out of the foyer, leaving a speechless Theo and an equally as flustered Nina, the receptionist, who, unfortunately for her, had nowhere else to go. "Well, that was awkward, yeah?" Nina giggled through a dam of nerves. "I'm sure they'll all forget about this one day." And with that, Nina went back to her very important task of organizing her paper clips by color. But you see, Theo was forever changed. He could not walk back into his cubicle, passing through the hallway of his colleagues' offices. He could not face the humiliation of having accidentally stolen a blind woman's dog. And somehow, more importantly, he could not forget how that dog walk felt, because he couldn't just leave. He had to face down his embarrassment and commit to this horrible job. This is what he told himself as he stood in the office staring at his briefcase. But then, a new thought popped into his head. What if he didn't? What if he didn't have to work in this awful office with these awful people doing such awfully boring work? What if his professional life could be, well, enjoyable? Well, this was a new thought. So Theo did something very, very un-Theo-like. He acknowledged his emotions, and then he acted on them. Theo packed up his mostly empty satchel, left an apology note for Mr. Jameson and his sons, and then left that brick building never to return. He wrote the woman in the navy dress a note too, and to be honest, he still wonders if that was the right thing to do. Theo now trains therapy dogs, and you know what? He's happy. Sweet dreams, you guys. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, put this on repeat so it does something to the algorithm that my 42-year-old brain will never understand. Good night.
Thanks for listening to Anxiety Addicts Bedtime Stories. We're here to help you take your mind off whatever is making you spiral by listening to a story about someone else's hilarious or mortifying experience. And we know you have your own. Please DM or email your stories of bad decisions, miscommunications, and Murphy's Law. Your support helps us keep doing what we love. And don't forget to like, rate, and subscribe. And as always, sweet dreams. This episode was written and recorded by Joe Newman with editing and sound design by Morgan Walsh.